Okay, so this tutorial is going to cover the tiling collage part of the assignment. I'm going to use a couple of images I have here from past versions of the assignment. One of the important things you want to kind of pay attention to is, when you take the photos for this particular um, deliverable, you want to make sure you're kind of orienting yourself to the light. Well, you want to make sure you're outside. For one thing, you're taking photos in the sunlight. You're orienting yourself to the light in an intentional way, because again, we're going to repeat this. So, if you have the type of geometry that, let's say, flips or rotates, you want to take a picture of each one of those perspectives. And then, of course, the other thing you want to pay attention to is like that you get a kind of straight on view. It doesn't have to be perfect. One of the things that's a good trick for this will be to, kind of zoom in a little bit and then step back, pull your camera or your phone back a little bit. And that'll make, the lens length a little bit longer, and it'll make the kind of photos seem more kind of ortho. So I'm gonna pull one of these pictures into Photoshop. I'm just gonna drag it in. That'll automatically kind of size my my file. I can also make a new file, obviously, and paste it in there, but I'll start with this. First thing you'll notice is that in the Layers panel, and by the way, any window that you want to have that you don't see, if you see me using it, if you go to Window at the top, all those like panels, tools, etc., they're all going to be in here somewhere. And I'll try and call out the names of them. But anyway, so layers is obviously layers. So the first thing we want to do is in Photoshop, when you open a photo like this to edit it, you'll notice that it says background. And what that and then it has a little like lock symbol next to it. And that's basically because, because we opened the photo itself rather than like pasting a photo in a blank document, it's going to keep that kind of locked as a background. Now we don't want it. We don't need to do that. So we're just going to double click on that guy, and it's going to say new layer. But what that means is it's just going to convert our background into an unlocked layer. So we can now go around and edit it and so on. The other thing I want to kind of pay attention to here is going to be the size of my canvas and the resolution of my canvas. If I go to image, adjustments, I'm sorry, not adjustments, image size. Now, there's a couple things to pay attention to. One thing is, unlike Illustrator, Photoshop is what's called a raster-based software, which means it uses pixels rather than vectors, vectors are like lines, right? That's the kind of thing we do with line drawing. In this case, we're doing pixels, like we're editing photographs where everything is like kind of, just every pixel is like a different color. So what we want to do is set the resolution of our image. And I'm going to change this to inches here. So I want the resolution to be pretty high because I want to print, at that resolution. But I also want, 72 is pretty low. Printing, you're going to want to be around 300 most of the time. That's, most printers can handle about that. So we're going to set the resolution to 300. We're also going to set the size of the page, once we put it in inches, to 17, right? Because we know our document is 11 by 17, which means we don't need this image to be any bigger. And one of the things you'll notice down here is it'll give you kind of some information about how big your file size will be. So obviously we want to save on that file size, and this is one way to do it. Now, what I'm going to do first, before I start doing my tiling, is I'm going to make a copy of this layer. I'm just going to right-click on the layer, and I'm going to go to Duplicate Layer. Okay, and so now I have a duplicate, right? I have multiples, same one. And so when I edit this one, I'm not going to mess up the original. I just want to keep that one kind of ready. Now I want to crop this image, but I don't want to crop my whole canvas. I just want to crop out like the kind of background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over on the left-hand side, the second tool from the top. It's called the Marquee tool. If you don't see it as a rectangle, click and hold. You'll see there's a couple different options. So we're going to use the rectangular one. And I'm going to try and make a selection kind of within the base of my tool, and I'm going to kind of crop out any edges that are like, showing background that we don't want. And so once I have it cropped, once I have that selection made, so I can move this around. I can also, if I hold Shift, I can add to it. So if I'm finding that I wanted to have, or if I wanted to subtract from it for that matter, I can hold Alt. See my little cursor will change from being a minus to a plus. So I can kind of subtract from my selection. Like that. Move that edge over just a little bit. Anyway, so, and you can also right click and just go deselect and start over if you want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to crop this image using this outline. So with that layer selected, I'm going to go in my layers panel. I'm going to click on the little rectangle with the circle in the middle of it. And what that will do is create what's called a layer mask. A layer mask, you can see it added like a new little swatch to my layer. So basically a layer mask is the thing that like controls the opacity of a layer in black and white or in grayscale. And so what that means is I can hold Alt and click on it. You can see over here, I just have black and I have white. And you can probably guess that anywhere it's black, the layer becomes invisible, and anywhere it's white, the layer becomes visible. So for example, if we wanted to still go in and edit the cropping boundary of this photo, I could select the paintbrush tool, and I can make sure I'm on my layer mask so you can see how I change which one is the active layer that I'm drawing on. So if I change it to my layer mask, go to the paintbrush tool, if I wanted to crop this one a little more, I'm going to click and draw, and I'm holding Shift on the keyboard to draw in a straight line. And you can see I'm cropping it more and more using my paintbrush tool. So anywhere I draw that's in black will start to crop my image. I'm just going Edit, Undo. I'm sorry, in Photoshop it's weird. You have to go a step backward, I think. It's Alt Control Z. Okay. And so there's the basic kind of, there's one tile kind of cropped down. The other thing I can do now is if I wanted to make this black and white and kind of mess with the contrast of it, what I would want to do is add what's called an adjustment layer. Now you can do this in image adjustments. So anything that's under this list is like a way that you can edit the appearance, the quality, the whatever of an image, of a layer. However, when I do it this way, it's kind of permanent. And so what I actually want to do is I want to use the same options over here in the layers panel. It's a little circle that's colored in half black, half white. And I have the same options that I can make, for example, if I go black and white, I can make a new layer that has that property. And what's nice about that is that it doesn't really change my image. It just affects my image, the way my image appears. So I'm not like kind of editing it beyond the point of no return, So anyway, so and in here I can kind of tune a little bit, like mostly we're gonna have like kind of blue and yellow tones to mess with, kind of getting a little bit of warm. Okay, there we go. That looks kind of okay. And then the other thing I want to mess with, so I should point out, obviously, in my layers panel, I have multiple layers. The order of the layers matters. So even with this guy, like it's only affecting things underneath it. So like when I put this layer of my image on top of the black and white, it's no longer black and white because that layer is not affecting it. So these adjustment layers will affect everything below them. Anyway, so if I wanted to adjust the contrast, again, we'll go back to the same button. These 4 options are all good ones for adjusting contrast. Obviously, this one is the most basic. Brighten it up, increase contrast, which is just, the difference between the bright and dark spots. The one that I really like is exposure. And again, we can brighten it and we can kind of darken it. Just by balancing highs and lows, we can kind of get more contrast out of it. We don't want to go too crazy. We don't want to make it, too bright that we can't see what's going on, or too dark that we can't see what's going on. Okay, so now we're pretty much ready to start making our tiled diagram. And I'm going to go in my layers panel. I'm going to select this layer again. And I think what you do is you right click and you go, I guess you have to be on the rectangular selection tool, you right click and you go free transform. And actually this is, oh yeah, because we cropped the image, of course. So this is how we change the size of something on a layer. We can also, I think the hotkey for that is Control T. And so when I'm scaling something, and this is going to be true for almost any Adobe software, if I'm holding Shift, I'm constraining its proportions, meaning I'm keeping it proportional, the width and the height. Very important, I always want to do that. If I'm holding Shift and Alt, I'm scaling it around the center rather than scaling it towards one corner. Make sense? And I'm just going to hit Escape, and that will kind of not save the transform changes. One thing I'm going to do right now, instead of trying to, because I want to tile this thing, so I want to be able to like repeat it and have them line up, I'm just going to actually like apply my cropping boundary. I'm going to actually crop out that information. Photo, so I'm going to right click on the cropping boundary and go to the layer mask and go to apply layer mask. Now you'll see when I do transform, it's snapping right to the image. That's going to make my life a little easier because then I can start to, so I'll press enter at the end. That way it'll save my transformation changes. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to the move tool. I can move this layer around independently. So that's going to allow me to like move these and line them up easily. I'm going free transform. Now, another thing, I'm just doing control space to zoom in and out. I think you can also do control plus and minus. You can also hold space, left click, and pan like that. So that's how you move around. Okay, so I'm going to actually fudge these proportions a little bit. There we go. And then I'll press enter. The hotkey for duplicating a layer is Control J. Now you obviously want to be kind of mindful of you know, how these images are all lining up. I think part of the challenge of this assignment is to design something where you kind of get this coherence between one module and the next. So this one's kind of getting there, not quite. But one of the things we could do, perhaps, we could flip one of these. See if that gives any possibilities. Yeah, and so when you flip it, obviously then you'll start to get these mirrored effects, right? Kind of interesting. Like that guy. But you know, maybe that's not the effect you're going for. You know, so you could get that kind of like symmetry to happen if you wanted to, which maybe starts to even almost appear like a larger module, you know, that's produced from several modules. Anyway, so I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to leave it how I had it. Okay. And remember, we want to do a 9-square grid. So, oh, also when you're trying to select a layer, like I just made a bunch of copies here, you know, and I don't really know which one is which anymore. I can right click on the layer and select it that way. It'll bring up a little list. That'll enable me to figure out which one is which. That. So we could mess around with kind of like how these alignments might look. Okay, and then, so we're trying to do a 9-square grid, meaning 3 by 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all those layers at the same time and scale them down so we have room for another row down here. And the way that I did that is I selected one of the layers. You can either hold Control on the keyboard and select the other ones that you want, or you can hold Shift and just go to the bottom and it'll select everything in between. And then when I hit Control T or Free Transform, it'll transform everything for me at the same time. And I can do the same with duplicating layers. And just kind of play around with this composition. Oh, there's the alignment I was looking for. That's good. But you can start to get these really interesting effects that come from playing around and see. Kind of lines up with itself, and it starts to make these really interesting effects and everything like that. So there you go. So the last step that I want to take here, and again, so I can select everything at once and kind of line it up in the center of my canvas. Remember that our exposure settings are affecting everything kind of downstream, every layer underneath it. We can still kind of tune that to make it read the way we want. Okay, and then last step will be to save it. We want to save it. With Photoshop, we always want to save it 2 times. And so we'll go to Save As. The first thing we always want to save is a .psd file. That's a Photoshop file. And what that will do, and I'm just going to, you can just click all these menus, just click them, leave them as default. But what that's going to do is it's going to save a file that preserves all my layers and all the edits I made in here. So if I want to go back and change what this is, I'm going to open that Photoshop file up, right? However, I also want a much smaller file size. That file, I think, is like, like 100 megabytes, kind of big. So what I want to do is I want to save a file size that's a lot smaller. So I'll go to File, Save As. Under Save As type, I'm going to choose JPEG. And that will allow me to save this, and I'm just going to more. Descriptive, there we go. Saving, I guess. What happened? Oh. There we go. Okay, and there we can see that's about a 5 megabyte file, and it's got pretty good resolution. If we zoom in on it, perfect for our layout. Okay, and so we could take that JPEG and go ahead and throw it in our InDesign file, and we'd be good to go. So that's going to kind of wrap up this tutorial on how to do the tiling diagram.